it's me, T-Rex! Yay! Today, I'm going to talk to everybody about catering to the individual differences in an ever-enlarging and diverse, inclusive classroom. What does that mean? I don't know. I have no experience with this. I'm going to bring in my buddy, James Kitchell, and he's going to help explain this issue to us. Come on, James!
Oh, hey T-Rex, how are you?
Good. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. So what do we want to talk about today?
Well, I was going to talk about the classrooms, how they're too big and diverse and inclusive rooms.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just did some service learning in a classroom that was pretty big.
Well, who does this impact?
Well, it impacts the teachers a lot. It gives them a lot of stress. It's hard to manage their classrooms with that many students. And even especially with an inclusive classroom because they have students with IEPs and 504 plans, so they need a little bit more attention sometimes. So these larger classrooms are harder to manage. And it's also kind of harder on the students too because they have more students to ratio like for the teachers. There's more of them. So they get less one-on-one time for the teachers. And they tend to get treated more as a group than individuals.
Oh, I see. Anyone else?
Yeah, kind of. I guess the parents, they kind of are impacted by it too because they get less feedback for their student and it's harder to schedule time with teachers.
Oh, so what grades does this take place in?
Well, it takes place in every public school classroom and every grade level from kindergarten to 12th grade, and it's everywhere because all of our classrooms are getting bigger.
So when does this occur?
Well, it's constantly been on the rise. There was the Center for Public Education said that they did a study and found out the most effective classroom size is about 18 students.
Oh, that's not very many.
No, that's not. But here in Arizona, our average is about 32 students. I know, that was my reaction too. We kind of copy each other, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So that's nearly about double the amount of students.
So why is that significant, James?
Well, I'll tell you, T-Rex. We've all know about IDEA, that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. You know about that, right?
No.
Well, so basically students with disabilities they're provided a free, appropriate education that's tailored to their needs.
That sounds good.
It is. But nowhere in there does it say that it's an inclusion. They're, eligible for inclusion classes, only that they're eligible to get an appropriate education.
Oh, what's that mean?
You like to ask a lot of questions, don't you, T-Rex? So the way it's worded is actually they have to educate the child in the least restrictive environment possible. So that wording gives them a lot of wiggle room.
Any examples?
Well, I'm glad you asked, yes. There was a court case, LH versus Hamilton, the Hamilton County Department of Education, it is. It was, I think, this is 2019. So last year, 2018, basically the school district disregarded an IEP team's request to keep a student in the general classroom, and they only pulled them out for math. They sent them to a special school for disabled students instead. The parents, they did not like that, and they pulled the student out and enrolled him in a private Montessori school while they sued the school district. So the district's theory, and they actually stated this in court, quote, "The district's theory is that because special education students are so different from their classmates, socially and intellectually, that they are necessarily isolated from them, even though they are physically in the same room. Thus, special education students can never truly be mainstreamed." That's what the school district said, and this was last year, not 100 years ago, last year. So ultimately, the decision was overturned by the court, and the district had to accommodate him for the IEP, and they also had to reimburse those parents for all the money they shelled out to put them into a private school while the investigation and lawsuit went on. So that was a pretty big win, I think.
Yeah, sounds like it. What kind of standards are affected by this?
Well, so the Arizona professional standards, I guess that's what you're talking about.
I guess so. I'm not sure.
T-Rex, you didn't really do your research before this, did you?
No, I'm just a host.
So there's 3 different standards I found that kind of really relate to this. One's learning differences, which basically says that the teacher uses understanding of individual differences and diverse cultures and communities to ensure inclusive learning environments that enable each learner to meet high standards.
That sounds appropriate. Anything else?
Yeah, planning for instruction. The teacher plans instruction that supports every student meeting rigorously learning goals, drawing upon knowledge. So basically, I mean, there's a lot of other words there, but basically, if the teachers have bigger class sizes and more special needs students in them, it's harder for them to plan for the instruction. And also assessments. It's harder for them to assess using multiple methods for, different students. And when you have a lot of different students, it's a lot of different methods to keep up with it and a lot of different levels of your learners.
So how do you advocate for your students with this need?
Well, advocations, that's kind of a big word to swallow right there. So I guess the obvious answer is to start lowering and limiting the number of students that can be placed into one classroom. And that seems pretty obvious. Most likely, I think that's set by the districts, and it's affected by the revenue that they have to work with. That's kind of less funds for education, the more teachers you have to put with each student. Or scratch that, the other way around. The more students you have to put with each teacher. So I think less can be done about the diversification of the student population because every child learns at a different rate and in different ways. And without having similar classes, it's unreasonable to think that every child can move from grade level to grade level with the same level of understanding. It is much more reasonable to have properly trained and engaged teachers that are willing to and supported by their staff to develop lesson plans that can accommodate that wide range of learners.
What?
Yeah, exactly. What? So,
can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so basically an example that I saw would be reading books, like just as simple as classroom reading time. You don't just have a set amount of, or a set level of book and just say, well, you're in the 4th grade, you have to read a 4th grade book. No, you tailor that to the level that each reader is, and you kind of let them choose what's of interest to them too, because studies show that kids read what's interesting to them, they're going to read more.
That makes a lot of sense, James.
Yeah, thanks, T-Rex. I try to make that make sense.
So, what have you learned from this course that you will use when you teach?
Well, this course, I learned that it takes a great deal of patience and understanding to reach students with a disability. I mean, it takes that for every student, but with disabilities, it takes even more. I also learned the importance of relationships. It is impossible to be effective without making strong and direct connections. I mean, really, there was so much in this course that was taught, and it meshed in with everything else that we learned so perfectly. It's kind of hard to see where like one method of learning ends and another starts. No, I guess I learned that special needs students or students with disabilities, they're just as intelligent and just as capable of everyone else. And that the term disability,
no, that's a pretty negative word.
Well, kind of. In our society, we kind of view it as a negative term, but it shouldn't be so. It should never be looked at as negative. It just means that they learn differently and need a different way of learning from us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, James.
Thank you for having me, T-Rex, and I hope this reaches your viewers and helps them learn a little bit more about teaching students with disabilities.